Hello, gentle students, gentle readers. Welcome back. This will be another lecture on the novel Hongloumeng, or Ji, Dream of the Red Chamber by Cao Xueqin, the 18th century Qing Dynasty author who wrote what is probably one of my favorite works of fiction. I should begin with something of a disclaimer, because the content of this lecture will deal with issues of lust and sexuality, and looking at these issues from a very Neo-Confucian and Buddhist point of view, which would be essentially admonitory. That is, that from the Buddhist point of view and the Neo-Confucian point of view, which Neo-Confucianism being a real mixture of Buddhism and Confucianism, there is an attempt through xiaoshuo, through novels, through literature, to convey an admonition against being lustful. But as the Buddhists say, you remove a thorn with the use of a thorn. That is, sexuality will be discussed in the narrative in a way that is something, it's tantalizing or titillating, but its intention is to cure you of an attachment to lust. So in any case, there will be some dimensions of this, the following remarks that may be considered a little risque. And so the theme really is the theme of desire or excess in Chinese literature. And these themes will occur throughout much of what is written in Chinese texts. And two, culturally, I think in the North American historical context, the sort of Puritan ideal, the Puritan ideas have really influenced how we can be sometimes sensitive to talk about sexuality sort of as openly as certainly China would. So the idea of what I want to call sort of yin should be, I should begin with conjuring two terms. One is yin, which is the idea of excess or lust. The character itself is it is a pictograph in a way that conveys the message of something almost like a sponge that has been over-soaked, so it can't hold anything else, right? So there's just too much fluid. It's an excess of fluid. And that idea, yin, of excess fluid represents an excess, that is having lustful desires that are too much for one's health. And then the other is yu, which yu means desire. So these two terms, yu and yin, desire and excess, will appear quite a lot in the narrative of Hongloumeng, the original Chinese. And translators such as David Hawkes will do a marvelous job, but it is a difficult job to convey Chinese ideas sometimes into a translated language. So first, again, both Neo-Confucianism and Buddhist teaching, Neo-Confucian and Buddhist rhetoric, one of the prominent dangers for a human being is the danger of sexual desire, of yu. So I'd like to discuss that in the following half an hour or so. So one of the things that you'll see is appearing in the novel is the theme of the mirror. So in Buddhism, the mirror is that thing which reflects to us the truth. It also reflects to us a kind of message of polarity, that there is both the real self, the Zhen self, and the false self, the Jia self. The Jia being the reflected, the false being the reflected, and the true being the self. But then again, in Buddhism, we'll conflate those ideas a little bit. Right, so let me get a little bit more concrete here. In Buddhism, the mirror represents right thought, right? It represents seeing things clearly. Mirrors reflect things as they really are, right? According to Buddhism, according to Neo-Confucianism. The word mirror in Chinese, 镜子, is a homophone for an entirely different character. 镜子 meaning mirror, and 镜子 also meaning male semen. And semen being a kind of metonym for a male tendency to be sexually excessive or excessively lustful or desiring. So mirror, jing, and semen, jing, are a homophone, right? And we'll see that these two words, jing, mirror, and jing, semen, are conflated in the novel in a specific passage that we'll talk about. And that is the passage wherein Jia Rui will die from his own sexual fantasies for Wang Xifeng in the novel. And then two, I think it's kind of interesting that in the novel there is a section about the Feng Yue Baojing, the Baojian, the precious mirror of love. So you will see throughout the novel this conflation of mirrors and attachments, romantic attachments. Now, Jia Rui, for those of you who've read the first volume, you will notice, you will recall that there is this character who is a friend of Jia Baoyu, and his name is Jia Rui, and he will become, he will become infatuated with Wang Xifeng, and his infatuation will lead him into quite a bit of trouble. Maybe not exactly a friend of Jia Baoyu, but he will figure as a very dramatic example of the problem of yin, of lust, and yu, and desire. So let's take a look. So in chapter 11 in the novel, Wang Xifeng is described according to a classic, what we might call a classical fox fairy trope in late imperial Chinese fiction, where in the West you will have this idea of a kind of vampire figure that is a blood-drinking person who thrives off biting and consuming the blood of human beings. In the Chinese context, we don't really have that. You have a different trope, and that is the trope of a woman who is typically a very lovely, a very beautiful woman who's quite cunning, and the woman will steal the essence of males, right? So they will steal an essence that will essentially give them life, right? So they will seduce young men, and they will have intercourse with them, receive their jing, their semen, and male jing will basically prolong their life or make them immortal. And so in China, they will call these women fox fairies. Let me just read a passage, right? A passage in the first volume, volume 1 of David Hawk's translation, page 236 to 237, and this will exemplify Wang Xifeng as a kind of fox fairy trope. It says this, quote, "Xifeng was making her way through the garden, admiring the view as she went, when a figure suddenly stepped out from behind an artificial hill of rock and made its way towards her." It's significant here, an artificial hill of rock. That would be a Taihu stone, and these Taihu stones are called Jiashan, false mountains. So the idea of the Jia family being the false family, and the Jiashan, the false mountain in the garden. So there's this playfulness with the text here that Cao Xueqin is using. So this person steps out from behind an artificial hill of rock and makes its way towards her. "How are you, cousin?" Xifeng gave a start of surprise and retreated a step. "Isn't it Cousin Rui? Don't you even know who I am, cousin?" "It isn't that I don't know you," said Xifeng, "but you did come up rather suddenly, and I wasn't expecting to see you here." "We must have been fated to meet, cousin," said Jia Rui. I had just slipped away from the party to take a little stroll in these peaceful surroundings. I never expected to meet my fair cousin here, but lo, so there must be a bond. He ogled her as he spoke with a fixed and meaningful stare. Right? So the first thing in Chinese literature that suggests that a woman could be a fox spirit is that she's being ogled by someone, a young male typically. And if she encourages it, then there's verification. So the text continues. Shifeng's sharp intelligence enabled her to penetrate without much difficulty the little game he was playing, and feigning an interest she did not feel, she answered him with a smile. I can see why Lian, that would be Shifeng's husband, I can see why Lian is always speaking so highly of you. From seeing you today and just hearing you speak those few words, I can tell at once that you are an intelligent, good-natured sort of person. At the moment, I'm on my way to join my aunts, and I'm afraid that I can't stay and talk to you. Perhaps we could meet some other time when we are both free. So here she's encouraging him. I should like to call on you when you are at home, said Zhao Rui, but I suppose a young person like your good self is not in a position to receive visitors of the other sex. Shifeng feigned a laugh. We're all one family, all one flesh and blood. I don't see that age comes into it. Zhao Rui was secretly delighted by this encouragement. I never dreamed today would bring a chance like this my way, he thought, and the goatish eagerness of his expression grew even more repellent. You had better hurry back to the party, said Shifeng. If they catch you playing truant, you will find yourself being sconced. Zhao Rui was by now scarcely in command of his own person. Slowly, very slowly, he walked away, frequently turning back to gaze at Shifeng as he did so. Shifeng mischievously provoked him by deliberately slowing down the pace of her own progress through the garden. What an odious creature, she thought to herself when there was some distance between them. Appearances certainly are deceptive. Who would have guessed he was that sort of person? Well, if he is, he had better look out. One of these days I'll settle his hash for him. Then perhaps he will realize what sort of person he is up against. So here you have this very clear literary allusion to this fox fairy trope. So what is a fox fairy then? Again, they're typically, sort of to expand on that theme, they're women who sometimes are actually described as foxes. That would be the actual animal of a fox, and there are these books that one finds beginning in the Ming Dynasty that are intended to teach young men how to discern what woman might actually be a fox fairy, because they're very dangerous, right? They're lamayas. They're women who steal men's essence, and when a fox fairy steals a man's essence, then he dies, right? So she somehow exhausts him of his male essence, and they become old and they lose their energy. And oftentimes fox fairies, when they steal men's essence in Chinese literature, their hair turns gray or their hair falls out, and they age prematurely, and then they die. And they die by having their male essence, their jing, right? Their jing taken from them. One of the things that these novels, that these books in the Ming and Qing dynasty, I should say that there was actually a belief in women being fox fairies. This is not just a literary convention. This is part of Chinese culture in the late imperial era. So these books would tell young men how to know if a woman was a fox fairy. So for example, sometimes they couldn't, they were actually foxes, and they would turn themselves into beautiful young women. And if they didn't have quite the skill to completely transform themselves into a woman, then their tail would perhaps remain. So one advice given to young men is make sure the woman that you are with doesn't actually have a tail. Another thing that one is supposed to check is if the woman smells like a graveyard. For some reason, fox fairies rather like spending time in graveyards. So if you smell a woman and she smells something of a cemetery, then that's a hint that she could be a fox fairy. The texts don't describe exactly what a cemetery smells like, but that's one of the things that you're supposed to do, smell them to make sure they don't smell like a cemetery. And then sometimes they don't really like the daylight. So there is a trait of these essence-stealing beings that is similar between the West and the East. The sort of vampire doesn't like the light, and the fox fairy spirit, the woman, does not like the light. By the way, there is an American-made movie called The Witches of Eastwick, which is based on a Chinese story, a similar story of 3 women who are actually fox fairies. So this is the Chinese trope of the fox fairy that has actually been changed into a Western, something of an equivalent that you can look for that yourself. Right. So so what happens to poor Zhao Rui in the novel, right? On 2 nights, that's be Wang Xifeng, sneaks Zhao Rui to her apartment, it's bitterly cold outside. On the 2nd night, Zhao Rui jumps. He actually goes in and he thinks he's going to have this rendezvous with Wang Xifeng. So she tells him, look, come one night. He goes and he gets rather sick, and then the 2nd time she entices him again, but she's laying a trap, right? So on the 2nd night, Zhao Rui sneaks into what he expected to be a rendezvous with her, and then who he thinks is Wang Xifeng. It's rather dark. He jumps on her, but it's actually not her. The Chinese is quite interesting. It says hu yi ban. He jumps on Xifeng like a hungry tiger. Right? So he jumps on her like a hungry tiger, but it wasn't Wang Xifeng. It was in fact Jiao Rong, one of the male members of the household who was in waiting, and he tries to Zhao Rui, who is now infatuated with Wang Xifeng, the fox fairy trope, tries to take her sexually, and discovers that it's actually not her, but it's Zhao Rong, a man, and who is part of this trap. And then what happens at the end of the day is he gets locked up at night, and she will pour on him her night soil. And the night soil, being her own excrement, she will pour it on him. He doesn't know that that's going to happen, but he's sort of hiding out. He's locked in overnight, and she pours her night soil upon him, a yin substance, a substance that's even though it's night soil, it's excrement. It's sort of associated with excess, with yin, and with his yin, his lasciviousness. And despite all of this, Zhao Rui, she basically traps him and pours her night soil on him, and despite all of that, he still has a lust for Wang Xifeng. She is the irresistible fox fairy. Let me just read to you the passage. It's quite fascinating about what happens to poor Zhao Rui because of his yin, because of his excess, and because of his yu, because of his desire. It says, well, first off, he had been caught, and the 2 men that were waiting for him basically extorted him for money, and then they tell him, wait here, and you can hide here and then be released in the morning, because he's locked in the Jia family compound, as you know if you've read this text. But it describes this moment of the night soil. Zhao Rui, by now a mere automaton in the hands of his captors, obediently crouched down beneath the steps, and was just beginning a series of calculations respecting his present financial predicament, when a sudden slosh signaled the discharge of a slop pail's stinking contents immediately above his head, drenching him from top to toe with liquid filth and causing him to cry out in dismay. But only momentarily, for the excrement covered his face and head and caused him to close his mouth again in a hurry and crouch silent and shivering in the icy cold. Just then Jia Qiang came running up. Hurry, hurry, you can go now, and then he escapes. Well, then what happens, right? he knows that he had been trapped. He knows that he had had excrement, night soil poured upon him. But the narrative continues, right? The Fox Fairy trope. Here's the Buddhist part, the part that's supposed to teach him to no longer give in to his excess, his yu, and his desire, his excessive desires. From that time on, though, he longed for Xifeng with unabated passion. He never dared to visit the Rongguo mansion again. Jiao Rong and Jia Qiang, on the other hand, came frequently to his house to ask for their money, so that he was in constant dread of his grandfather finding out about the IOUs. Unable even now to overcome his longing for Xifeng, saddled with the heavy burden of debt, harassed during the daytime by the schoolwork set him by his exacting grandfather, worn out during the nights by excessive masturbation, inevitable in an unmarried man of 20s whose mistress was both unattainable and constantly on his thoughts, twice frozen, tormented, and forced to flee. What constitution could withstand so many shocks and strains without succumbing in the end to illness? The symptoms of Zhao Rui's illness, a palpitation in the heart, loss of taste in his mouth, a weakness in the hams, a smarting in the eyes, feverishness by night, and lassitude by day, albumin in the urine, and blood flecks in the phlegm had all manifested themselves within less than a year. By that time, they had produced a complete breakdown. So, what happens? His lust, his excess, and this encounter with Wang Xifeng is draining him of all of his essence, right? So, the theme of lust and its dangers is harshly taught to the reader, because what happens to him, of course, is he's given a mirror by this Taoist, and the mirror of the Jing it has two sides, and the Taoist tells him the only way to survive your illness is to look at this side of the Jing, but not the other side of the Jing. This side of the mirror, but not the other side of the mirror. On the side that will restore his health, he sees a skull, a hideous skull. And that skull is really a kind of Buddhist symbol of a kind of a memento mori, right? It's a reminder of your mortality, that your behavior in this life matters because you're going to die. And what happens then when he turns the mirror over, the side that the Taoist monk, tells him, this mirror will heal you only if you look at the skull side, but not the other. When he turns it over, he sees, of course, an image of Wang Xifeng. And when he sees the image of Wang Xifeng, he's drawn into intercourse with her magically in the mirror, and he emits his Jing. So he looks at the Jing, the mirror, and when he looks at the wrong side of the Jing, he emits his Jing, his semen, and ends up dying of an exhaustion of his own essence. Well, the novel is full of passages that suggest this theme, the theme of moderation, the theme of temperance, the theme of avoiding yin, of avoiding excess, avoiding yu, of avoiding desire that is too much. Now, some scholars, I think most scholars, really suggest that the chapters that contain mirror allusions, these chapters, these passages with mirrors, are didactic. They are part of maybe even an original book by Cao Shuiqin called A Mirror for the Romantic, right? That is, these mirror passages represent a Buddhist message that was in another work by Cao Shuiqin about the meaning of mirrors as a theme for didactically exhorting us to keep our passions in check. Well, the theme of lust appears several ways, right, in the novel. For example, in Jia Baoyu's dream in chapter 5, what does fairy disenchantment tell him? She gives him this very powerful and very evident exhortation, this admonition about regarding excess. She says this: 好似己淫，知情更淫. That is, to enjoy sexual pleasure can be lustful, and to know passion, right, is even more lustful. That is this theme of qing, of passion, and that being excessive feelings, excessive passion, right? This is very dangerous. So I guess in conclusion, right? In conclusion, the theme of lust, of yin, and feminine yin, like yin being the idea of the feminine. These themes, yin, lustfulness, excess, and yin, the feminine sort of yin and yang, the feminine pole. They're enmeshed with the image of the jing, right? So yin feminine and yin excess are enmeshed with the image of the mirror, the jing, and male semen essence, jing. All of these are part of the author's attempt to show reality from perhaps a very Buddhist perspective, right? That is to use sexuality to warn people about the problems of excessive sexuality. So Jiaorui's mirror is a strong example of the perils of lust and the discomfort of knowing the truth. So again, that theme I think is something that we will see quite a lot in the novel Hongloumeng, and it will appear in other works, for example, by Li Yu, and in the novel called Jinping Mei, the Golden Lotus, the vase, the Golden Lotus, and even in Shui Hu Zhuan, in Outlaws of the Marsh, you will have a passage with Wu Song and Pan Jing Lian that will sort of equate Pan Jing Lian in this other novel with the trope of the fox fairy. Well, I hope that was very helpful and sort of help you to understand more about the novel's message. And for everyone's health, I will recite another traditional Chinese toast. 祝你们身体健康. I wish you good health. 不知有何来世, 且听下回分解. If you wish to know what happens next, stay tuned to the next lecture. Ganbei. Cheers.